Okay, so to solve the warm-up, Danielle, what do I do first? Good. Subtract 7 from both sides. So everyone write what we're left over with. We're left with -1/2 times x minus 3 equals 12 minus 7 is 5. Okay. What do I do next? Good. What's another way of dividing by 1/2? Multiplying by 2. Y'all are saying the exact same thing. So I'm going to just do this and cancel it out. And I'm going to multiply this side by 2. Y'all are saying the exact same thing. Okay, so I have -1 square root x minus 3 equals 5 times 2 is 10. What should I do next? Yep, divide by this -1 to get rid of it. All right, so now I have the square root of x minus 3 equals 10 divided by -1 is -10. Great.
No solution.
Okay, maybe, we'll see. Okay, so guys, now that my square root symbol's by itself, there's nothing outside of it now. What do I do? Yep, you square both sides. And why did you say no solution? Ooh, thank you. We don't need to even do that part. A square root is equal to a negative number. When you get a square root equaling a negative number, you just stop right there and say no solution. So you don't even have to square both sides. You don't have to finish solving. You just stop right there and say no solution. Any questions, guys? All right, let's go ahead and start the notes. So go ahead, flip to page 15. We're going to do square root inverses. We're going to solve it algebraically this time. Okay, so the step one is to switch x and y. That's the first step, switch x and y. So guys, let's move to an example and do the first step. This is the first example. We're going to switch x and y. So instead of writing a y equals, we're going to put an x equals. I'm going to put the y right here. I wrote the exact same problem, but all I did was switch x and y. That's always step one. Whenever you're doing inverses, this is what you do. Okay, let's do step 2. Step 2 is solve for y. That's step 2. This is the process when you're solving inverses. Okay. So let's go ahead and solve for y. I want to get y by itself. What do you think our first step will be? Yep, adding 2. So we're going to add 2 to both sides. So let's write what we'll have. I have x plus 2 equals the square root of y plus 3. That's what we have now after we added 2 to both sides. Now, someone in my last class said, why isn't this just 3x? You cannot add these together. The 2 does not have an x. Those are not like terms. It does not become 2x. It doesn't become 3x. It just stays just like that. Okay. So guys, there is nothing outside of the square root symbol. So what do I do now? Yep, I'm going to square both sides. So the square root will cancel out with the squared. And now let's do the other side. Do not just square the 2. I want you to square the entire thing. Don't just square the number 2. You need to square the entire side. Okay, so just put it in parentheses. All right, so let's write what we have now. we have x plus 2 squared equals y plus 3. Now, what's the final thing that I have to do to get y by itself? Yes, subtract 3. So if I subtract 3, 3 minus 3 is 0, that's gone, and then subtract 3 from this side. So my final answer is x plus 2 squared minus 3. That's the inverse. So put the inverse symbol. The inverse symbol has the little -1 on it. This is the inverse symbol. Okay, so guys, let's sketch this because we want to talk about what the domain and the range is. So right off to the side here, this transformed by going to the left 3 spaces and it went down 2 spaces. That's what you can tell from the original problem. So guys, go ahead and sketch this off to the side. What does it look like? Normally your parent function looks like this. However, after being transformed, it went to the left 3 and down 2. So now it's here. So what's in red is what your graph now looks like. Does that make sense? Okay. It starts off right here where it is in black, but then it moved to the left 3 and down 2. So now that we know what it looks like, let's talk about the domain and the range. So here's the left side of the graph. Where's the left side at? -1, 2, 3, -3. So my domain, it starts at -3, and then it goes to the right towards infinity. So infinity. That's your domain. You always go left to right. If you forget that, put L to R, left to right for the domain. Okay, now let's talk about the range. How do you read the range? It is -2, but how do we read it? Where do you start? Yes, bottom to the top. Thank you, Jaden. Bottom to the top. So here's the bottom, and that's at -2. So your range will be -2, and it goes up. So infinity. Do you guys remember from yesterday how do you find the inverse domain and range? Yep, you just switch them. So we're just going to switch these. Your domain would be -2 to infinity, and your range would be -3 to infinity. You just switch the domain and range. So that's what the inverse would look like. All right. So that's example 1. Let's do example 2. All right, so this is what we're given. Step 1 is to always switch x and y. F of x is another way of saying y. So we're going to write this as x equals 2 times the square root of y minus 1 plus 4. All right. What should I do first? Subtract 4. Subtract 4. So this is what I'm going to have. X minus 4 equals 2 square root y minus 1. All right, what's next? Yep, divide it by 2. But also divide this side by 2. You need to divide everything by 2. Okay, so we divided everything by 2. Let's see what we have. I have x divided by 2 minus, what's 4 divided by 2? And then y minus 1. So this is what we have now. All right, there is nothing outside of the square root symbol. So what can I now do? Yep, we're going to square both sides. So square this side, the square root will cancel out with the squared. we're also going to square this entire side, not just the 2, the entire thing. So it needs to be in parentheses. Okay, so let's write what we have now. This is x divided by 2 minus 2. We square it, equals y minus 1. And I just have one final thing to do. Exactly. So we'll add 1. That cancels out. And add 1 to this side. So that's my inverse. I'll write it nice over here. So I have x divided by 2 minus 2 squared plus 1. That's my inverse. And just put the inverse symbol. So that is the inverse. And like we did on the last problem, just sketch a graph so you can see what happened to it. I know the transformations, this right here makes it go to the right 1, and it goes up 4. So right 1, up 4 is right there. So it looks like that. From there, you can figure out the domain and range, okay? So the left side is right here. That's at 1. So your domain is 1 to infinity. And then let's do the bottom. So the very bottom is right here. The bottom is at 4. So that would be 4 to infinity. Oh, this should be a bracket. Okay. And if you want the inverse, the domain of the inverse, you just swap it. So this will be 4 to infinity, and your range would be 1 to infinity for your inverse. Okay, so guys, that is the end of our notes. I do need you to write down this one important thing, okay? Let me just draw you a picture real quick. Or let me give you this. Y equals square root x plus 1 plus 4. What's the transformations for this? Thank you. Left 1, up 4. So if I were to sketch this, it went left 1, up 4. So it's right here. Left 1, up 4. Now, if I put a negative in the front, it will face down. So that's going to change your range. It's not going up anymore, it's going down. Now, if I put a negative, instead of putting the negative on the outside, if I put it on the inside, like this, it will reflect going this way. It will go like this. Okay? Those are the differences. So normally, I'll just put the standard one. Y equals square root of x. It looks like this. Y equals negative square root of x. It looks like this. Y equals square root negative x. It looks like this. Okay, so look at those 3 graphs and make sure you memorize those, okay? That's how the negatives affect the graph. So your domains and ranges will change if there's a negative in there, okay? All right, so that's my last important thing. You guys can go ahead and do the practice.